Okay, everybody, we've got an amazing show for you today. I'm really excited because Ginkgo Bioworks CEO and co-founder Jason Kelly is here to talk about how they've created a $15 billion business by creating basically the AWS, the cloud computing platform for synthetic biology. We get into biosecurity, i.e. the COVID-19 virus, and gene editing, and the ethics around designer babies and dinosaurs, woolly mammoths, the whole bit. It's really science fiction, and he's actually, unlike most science executives we interview, he's actually really interesting and jazzed up about this. It's an incredible peek into the future and just how amazing biology is going to get now that we can program it. But first, I want to do a segment as part of our fun segments, our Founder University, these new Founder University segments. And I want to talk about why monthly updates are so critical for you as a founder to get more downstream investments. Stick with us.
This Week in Startups is brought to you by Squarespace. Turn your idea into a new website. Go to squarespace.com/twist for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use offer code TWIST to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. And Rippling helps thousands of fast-growing startups automate their HR and IT, from their team's payroll and benefits to devices and apps. See how at rippling.com/twist.
So why are monthly investor updates so important? I have been talking about this forever. I did a blog post years ago that if you're not getting updates from your founders, the company is going out of business. And in chapter 27 of my book, Angel Investor, I said it very clearly. If your startup isn't sending you monthly investor updates, it's going out of business. I would receive investor updates from Uber, Calm.com, all of the great companies I invested in, Robinhood, on a regular cadence. But from the companies that were failing, they didn't send updates. And this is a real trend, so much so that I put it into our side letters with our founders. Not because I'm going to take legal action against a founder. No, that never happens in Silicon Valley. You can count on one hand the number of times investors have actually sued founders. Theranos, Uber, it very rarely happens. And somebody has to feel very wronged or that they really disagree about the direction of the company. No, we put it in there to basically codify with the founder that this is something that's important. Now, why is it so important? Well, it's super important because for you as a founder, when you consistently write updates, you then build the infrastructure for a high-performance organization. That's what you're doing. Now, when I started my first companies, I only had one or two investors, so I was in regular contact with them. Mark Cuban was the investor in Weblogs Inc. He would email me. He would invite me sometimes to the All-Star game. We got to chat. It was a different time period. 20 years ago. Things were slower. People didn't have as many investments. And he'd offer advice. He'd brainstorm with me. But it really got in my head that talking to your investors on a regular basis, it built your credibility. And then when I needed his help down the road, he was engaged. And that's where in 2015, I wrote this blog post, why investor updates are really, really important. It's going to be in the show notes, or you can, if you want to, go ahead and Google it, why investor updates are really, really important, calacanis.com. So back then, I pointed out 4 reasons why these were so important. Number 1, startups can launch a product in a couple of months as opposed to a year, because of no code, etc. So these products are moving faster, and emailing your investors lets you help them spread the word, get you press, get you customers and users to use your product, right? Things are moving faster. And since startups are launching faster, they're scaling faster. The market was so hot back then that we'd see the companies get higher and higher valuations earlier and earlier. So if things go well, it's not uncommon for follow-up funding to happen much quicker and to be more necessary because you're growing faster, which means you might be burning more fuel. In other words, losing more money. And investors need to know this is happening. If you put yourself in their shoes, they want to know when the next round is happening. Maybe they'll invest in 5 other companies, and then you give them an update and say, hey, I need to raise money. And they say, you know what? I've invested enough in startups for the last 6 months. I'm going to take a pause. And now you've lost that investor. And because the market is so robust, it quickly becomes clear if something's not working. This means you might need to do a minor or a major pivot in your first year. Maybe you'll do 2 or 3 pivots before you figure it out. That is not uncommon. In fact, if you look at a company like Uber, the black cars was the first business, but really it was the ride-sharing cars that made it go global, and then eventually Uber Eats. So sometimes it's a second or third business that is the important one. Well, founders will pitch investors and get the money for the first idea, but you need to take them along the ride and make sure they understand why you pivoted and what the next business is, so you have their buy-in so they can keep investing. And when somebody invests in a company and they see a high-profile person on the cap table or they've heard about it, they're going to call your previous investors. If the previous investors are informed and jazzed up, it makes it really easy for another rich person to invest money in your company. If the other person says, yeah, I never hear from the founder, what impact do you think that has on downstream investors? It's terrible for you. Competition is fierce. There are many more startups out there. I said this at the time. And now it is probably 5 times that. There are tons of copycats, as I mentioned back in the time. And so if you can keep your investors updated on how you're different than the copycat businesses and why they should still believe, this is going to be huge for you. Investor updates are seemingly hard for some people and easy for others. And the reason is, if you are the type of founder who makes a plan and sets goals, well, now you've got the framework of your update. You had a plan to start a newsletter business, let's say, Substack, Inside.com, whatever it is. And you said, you know what? I want to get to 10 newsletters. And that means I'm going to have to hire 10 writers. And I want to get to $50,000 in advertising in each. Well, now we've set a goal for 18 months from now. If you're going to launch 10 of them, well, that means every other month you're launching an email newsletter. And you're hiring a $60,000 writer or a $70,000 writer, whatever it is. So you know your cost basis, and you know you're going to lose $20,000 per newsletter in the first year because $50,000-$60,000 in revenue, $70,000, $60,000 for a writer. You get the idea. You have a framework in which to benchmark yourself against those projections and the reality. That makes writing your monthly update super easy. So if you don't do 2 or 3 investor updates in a row, that is when investors get worried. We can't help you if you don't tell us what's going wrong. And investors believe in you and they want to help you. So an immature founder will think, oh my God, they're micromanaging me. You know, a lot of investors don't even read the updates, or they might scan them. So we'll talk about what should be in the update in a moment, but just keep in mind that an update in and of itself builds your credibility. Even if the update is short and has one chart. If the update is, we're still working on our 2.0 product, sales are flat, we're hiring for this one position, we have 17 months of runway, we plan on starting the fundraising process in 9 months. What I just said is the update, right? That is going to be super easy for you to write. A short update is better than no update. And knowing the bad news is better than not knowing anything. Obviously. And your investors, if you're picking the right ones, probably have more information about the market than you do. They probably have more experience than you do. And obviously they have more money than you do because they're your investors. You would have funded it yourself. So not sending an update because you're ashamed or you want to clean something up or hit some other milestone, that is the cardinal mistake that you can make. You want to tap your investors. If your startup isn't sending those updates, it's probably, in their mind, means you're going out of business. So keep your investors updated, but your monthly updates are not just for the investors, they benefit you because you are now setting goals and your team can rally around those goals. You can tell the team, I want you to help me write this update, which is what I do. I'll tell my team, give me an update for the fund. I want to know which investments have gone up. I want to know which investments have shut down. And then I want to know what follow-on funding we've done. Just give me 3 sections and then I'll write some narrative on top. You make sure all the bullet points are correct. So I have that framework. That allows me, on the investment side of the business, to delegate to some team members and let them participate in it, right? And then they queue it up for me, and all I have to do is focus on the narrative. You can do that too. You tell your sales team, these are the numbers I need. How many people renewed contracts? How much did our monthly revenue go up? Who landed and expanded? Just give me these 5 bullet points. Now, they may write you 20 bullet points, and you just pick the 5 that you think are most important. But this builds your credibility. You know, when you're looking at these, what should be in it? Pretty clear. Some kind of summary at the top, just a quick narrative. Short is better than long. You can do a section with a team update. Now, this doesn't need to be about your interns or some junior developer, but more significant positions, we're going to add a CTO or a CTO was fired. Those are the kind of things you put in that team update. For product, really high level updates. We pushed 2 updates to the App Store. Here's links to what we updated in the app. And here's what we're working on next, a little bit of the roadmap, just very simple, top level, maybe marketing, and your go-to market strategy. People seem to love that. But my personal favorite is charts. If they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, a chart is worth 1,000,000. If you can put a chart in there, then you will instantly engage your investors. Think about yourself. You get a chart about the growth of Amazon Web Services, or you get a chart about the growth of Uber or Airbnb. Are you going to look at it? Of course, your mind is going to immediately try to understand the data on that chart. And if you're an investor in it, it goes up even more. Just think, if you open up your stock trading app, you look at your Robinhood, your Wealth Fund, your crypto account, you're going to open it up and you're going to be engaged in that chart, right? You're going to want to zoom in and understand it, maybe make predictions on it. I always suggest putting the most important metrics right up top in your update. So I love the idea of putting quarterly revenue up top or monthly revenue with your projection. So you put in one color, blue, here's our performance, and then you put in yellow or green, these are our projections for the next 6 months. That's a great way to get your investors and your team aligned around what the goals of the company are. And if you show that hockey stick, or even if it's, up and down, the quarterly's up, but the months are a little staggering, that's going to get you more investment in my experience. So numbers of customers, right, versus users, these are two different things. So you don't want to massage the data. Like cumulative charts are known for being kind of BS in our industry. Why? They always go up and to the right. You're only adding to it. So it's better to have your monthly performance. Here's how many monthly new users we had versus here's the cumulative users, or here's how many active users we have versus signups. In the old days, people would just talk about their signups and it's like, well, that's only going up and to the right. And you can always tell an immature founder, or maybe one who's massaging the data, or maybe not as straight up, let's say, because they use the cumulative charts. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Blog or publish content, promote your business, announce upcoming events or special projects, and sell products and services of all kinds and more. They also have powerful e-commerce functionality, and everything is optimized for mobile right out of the box. So no matter what you're using, an iPad, a Surface, an iPhone, an Android phone, it doesn't matter. All these beautiful templates just work. And of course, it's got built-in SEO, free and secure hosting, and 24/7 award-winning customer support. We did remote demo day in 2020. We were suffering through the pandemic. We were confused. How are these startups going to get funded? And I said, you know what? Throw up a Squarespace site. It's a project. Maybe it turns into a business. And boy, did it ever. We have now funded over a dozen companies, over $14 million in funding. And this all from setting up a simple Squarespace website and tweeting it. So go to squarespace.com/twist for a free trial. Squarespace.com/twist for a free trial. When you're ready to launch, use the offer code TWIST and save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. And congratulations for the team going public by direct listing on May 19th. What an amazing journey it's been. Congratulations again. Okay, let's get back to this amazing episode. If you can put two different data points on the left and the right of your chart, now you look really sophisticated. Here's our revenue and here's the number of customers. The revenue is the line and the bar chart is the number of customers, or vice versa. Now you look super sophisticated. Breaking down your revenue by revenue stream, super important. Like let's say you have part of your business is SaaS revenue and part of it's consulting. Sometimes people get a $100K consulting job. They put it into a chart with $50K of SaaS and it gets spiky and it looks weird. If you have two different revenue lines, put them in two different charts or make a stacked bar chart. But just be clear about that. You really don't need to put in your expenses or your sales pipeline. A lot of those are optimistic and BS. And when people show me pipeline instead of revenue, I have one founder who kept sending me pipeline and not the actual revenue. I said, this is getting really tiresome that I have to every month ask you to send me the actual revenue, not your pipeline, and you're starting with your pipeline, not your revenue. Do you realize how much you're lowering your credibility by talking about pipeline instead of reality? Let's talk about reality, not what you're going to do, but what you've accomplished, right? They've already got the investment. You're not selling promise anymore. You're communicating progress. You're not selling promise anymore. You've already got these investors. Now's the time to share with them your progress. But you do need to tell us what your burn is or what your profit was every month and how much cash you have in hand. And then based on that, how much runway you have. If your profits and your losses, your burn and your profit are spiky, take the last 3 months and say, based on our last 3 months burn, we made 10K one month, we lost 20K another month, and then we were even another month. Okay, so net, you were down 10K, which means you're burning on average 3,000 a month. Perfect. That's great. Average it out so we know when you're going to run out of money, and tell us how big's the team and how much are you spending on the team. Some people will put team size, 60 people. I'm like, wait a second, you're spending 50K on salaries, you have 60 people? And they're like, oh, well, we have 30 freelancers getting paid $500, and then we have the core team of 10, and then we got 10 people in Manila getting paid $1,000 a month, right? You really need to be honest about that as well. Asking people to hit reply and let me know if you have any questions, or telling them what you need help with. We're hiring for these 3 positions. We need a connection at Disney. These are interesting ways for you to put things at the bottom to see which investors are active and which investors open the email. All good things for you to know. But runway is absolutely critical. So we have a system internally. I'll explain to you how it works because it's important for you to know if you're going to work with us. And it's important for you to know how seriously I take this. Most investors, I think, especially early stage ones, if you're not performing, they'll just write you off. Let me say that again. If you're not performing and you're not updating them, they're going to write you off. In their mind, they're just going to say, it was a mistake to invest in you. Now, I'm being candid with you. That's what we do here on the pod. I'm always candid with you. You be candid with me. They'll just write you off because 80% of their investments go to zero. Right? 80% of startups fail. And then your top 10% are 95% of your eventual returns. In other words, for me, InsideCom, Grin, Fitbod, and Robinhood, and this cohort of companies I've been lucky enough to invest in, they're going to be the majority. So I could easily just say, the people who don't update me, forget them. I don't want to do it that way. I want to win every time, or at least have a chance, and I want to learn every time. So what we do internally is we keep track of every month who sends us an update, and we will email them, and then we'll message them in Slack. Hey, we didn't get a January update. We do have December, and we didn't get, and maybe in February, right? So it's 2 months later. We got your December update. Now it's February. At the end of February, we'll say, hey, or maybe let's say March 1st. We didn't get a January update. Wondering when the February update's coming. Did we miss it? It might have been in our spam folders. What email did you send it to? Or if you haven't sent one, would love to get a quick update on our investment so we can be helpful. We communicate that to founders. Then if it gets to 3 months, they will CC me. So the person on my team who sends these emails and keeps track of it, they'll CC me, and then I'll just say something positive like, hey, how's it going, pal? This way, founders know that we actually take our work seriously. So if you're an investor and listening to this, you want to do this in a kind way. We're not trying to lord over people or, micromanage them. We just know when it gets 2 or 3 months, it's probably because things aren't going well. I would say 9 out of 10 times, it's because things aren't going well. And we can then, in the 4th month now, we have your phone number. And so now the new process is when we get to month 4, somebody on my team is going to text you and say, hey, can we set up a meeting? Me, you, Jason, let's have a call and see how you're doing. Because we won't say this out loud, but what we're thinking is if you really can't get it together to write an update or respond to our emails, if we get on the phone, maybe you'll just tell us what's going on. Maybe you're suffering from anxiety and depression and you're paralyzed. Maybe you lost your top 2 lieutenants. Maybe you're fighting with your founder. Those are things that I'm good at dealing with. The harder the challenge, the better I am. That's what I do for a living. I have had founders want to kill each other. I have had, founders lose their top 2 or 3 employees and be burning money. I've had founders being sued. I've seen it all already. That's when you should engage me. I'm your fixer. Call me. Let me help. And that's what we do. And it tends to work out really well. The sad part is often the times we get an update is when it's too late for us to help. And that's why I started all this, because I was getting super frustrated. I had somebody call me after 4 emails to them, 5 emails. They said, oh, we shut the company down. I said, when did that happen? They said 2 months ago. I said, I've been asking you for 5 months for an update. You shut the company down 5 months ago? They're like, yeah, it wasn't working. I'm like, okay, explain to me. They're like, well, it could have worked, but my co-founder wasn't into it and we couldn't decide if we wanted to go enterprise or we wanted to charge for consumers or go free. I was like, well, I could have talked to you about that. I would have given you great advice there. Or we could have flipped a coin, or we could have bought out your founder, whatever. This is incredibly frustrating to have a failure because the founders didn't communicate. So you also want to have people rooting for you. It's a crowded market. Yes, there's a ton of money out there, but there's only so much time. All investors go through this cycle. where they become post-money. In other words, they don't need to make more money. They might like to make more money, but they don't need it. They've already bought their house. They got their second house. Maybe they want to upgrade some things in their life, but they're post-money. What they really want to do is win and enjoy their job. If the person is not communicating, that's not fun. So then you stop rooting for them. And I see this all the time where I've had people on boards with me or people I've co-invested, and they just say, don't bother, just write it off. Why are you even still trying to help that founder? They're bozos. I've literally heard people say that. That founder's not worth your time. That's what they say. All because you didn't keep them updated. And then you need that bridge round. Then you need extra money because you didn't hit your number or you got a bad beat or you got sued or something happened, right? Your CTO or your salesperson quit. Maybe your big customer canceled. And now the people who you took all that time to convince to root for you no longer root for you. That's the bummer, isn't it? And then you know what? You're probably going to start a second or third company. And now they're not going to root for you. Josh Williams of Gowalla, I invested maybe 10K in Gowalla. They sold to Facebook. I think we eventually got like 10K back and some Facebook stock years later. I invested in The Last Guide, his second company, didn't work out. And now he's doing Gowalla again. I invested a third time. 3 times I invested in Josh Williams. I'll invest in him 30 times. Always kept me updated. Always built a great product. Always was just the type of person you wanted to root for. Raul from Superhuman. Invested in Rapportive. He kept me updated. I call him. I text him. He responds instantly. Now Superhuman is doing great. He tripled my money on Rapportive, and now he's doing Superhuman. He's going to 1,000x my money, I'm convinced. I would bet on anything he does ever in his life. But he always takes the time to communicate. And you see it when Raul sends updates, not just to his investors, but he sends updates to his entire customer base. Not only updates on his product, but ways to be better founders. He has a little update list where he tells people how to be better founders. I'm beating a dead horse here. You need to stop what you're doing. If you haven't talked to your investors right now, you need to get out your Grammarly, your Google Docs, your Notepad. You need to write 100 to 500 words. Just do it, even if it's hard. And don't write 5,000 words. Nobody wants a TLDR, too long, didn't read. There is a direct correlation between how many words there are in the update and how good the news is. It's a negative correlation. The more words there are, the less good news there is, right? The more good news there is, the less words there are. I've gotten the simplest updates from calm.com. This month, sometimes I just search for the updates from calm.com and I start in 2017 and I just look at those emails. I get a big smile on my face. Thank you, Michael and Alex and the team at Calm. I would just write back to them, unbelievable. Wow. And it would be a short update. This month, we hit this many subscribers for this much money. And I watched it go from low single digits, thousands, to tens of thousands, to hundreds of thousands, to millions, to tens of millions. And then now you probably get the idea. Companies got 2 commas and maybe someday they'll have 3 commas, trace commas. Short updates mean good news. Keep it tight. Tight is right. Get in the game and start writing right now, today, not tomorrow, today, tonight. If you're listening to this at 11 p.m. at night, I want you to write those 100 to 500 words to your investors. You sleep on it. Tomorrow morning, you hit the send button, okay? Let's get to work, people. The new world of remote work is here to stay. So are all of the HR and IT headaches that come with it. Like, how do you register your startup with dozens of state tax agencies? Or how do you comply with all those different local labor laws? Rippling, which I use for my team at Inside, can answer those questions easily for you. They make it easy to manage both local and remote employees and contractors, whether they work from HQ or Timbuktu. When you hire in new states, Rippling can automatically register your startup with each state's tax agency and keep you compliant with local labor laws. Rippling lets you onboard new hires in 90 seconds. You can instantly set up payroll, benefits, and apps like Slack and GitHub. And you can ship them a work laptop with all the software and security they need. Inside loves Rippling because it takes a lot of complexity off our plate so we can focus on more important stuff like sales and hiring and our key business. And now, thanks to Rippling's new PEO option, your employees can likely access better Fortune 500 level benefits for less than other platforms. So here is your call to action. If you're looking for an easier way to run your startup remotely or just a better way to manage your HR and IT, visit rippling.com/twist. That's RIPPLING.com/twist. All right, next up on the program, Jason Kelly is here. He is from a company called Ginkgo Bioworks. Ginkgo Bioworks is doing really interesting things in synthetic biology. Welcome to the program, Jason.
Thanks, Jason. Two Jasons, though, by the way.
Exactly.
I don't want this to turn into like a Highlander situation or something.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about where synthetic biology is today. I think if I were to describe it, there is this ability to edit genes now in order to make cells, and that is opening up a world of possibilities. And the other thing I know is like we did the human genome like in 2000 or something.
Yeah.
But that cost millions of dollars and took an inordinate amount of time. But something has happened in the last 2 decades that has made this start to move towards looking like a software business more than looking like this biology business.
Yeah.
Am I correct in my general description of synthetic biology today? And what has changed over that 20-year arc?
Yeah, I think you're correct even at a deeper level than that, right? So
Okay.
what's really cool about biology, like once you get into it, is you realize the whole thing runs on digital code in the form of DNA, right?
Got it.
So which is just, just like shocking, right? Like think about it. Like every plant and animal running around out in the world, like inside every cell in those organisms is a piece of digital code, right? It's A, T, C's, and G's, not zeros and ones. But like, holy crap, it's digital, right? And so what synthetic biology is sort of accepting that fact and then saying, if we can just get better at reading and writing that code, and if you draw the analogy, if you can read and write code and you have a machine that'll run it, which is sort of how we think of a cell when it comes to DNA, you're programming. Well, then we ought to build programming tools. And so that was the origin of synthetic biology, sort of like back 20 years ago, was a bunch of programmers and engineers coming into biology and being like, holy crap, it runs on code. Does that make sense?
That makes, it actually crystallizes it really easily for me. But when we think about this, we built computers over some number of decades. Now we're actually getting closer to a century of building computers than we are
wild,
decades.
Isn't it?
It's pretty wild when you think about it. Like the PC showed up in the late 70s, early 80s, and that is now 40 plus years from now. And then, guys were working on those,
I remember
50s and 60s were working on mainframes, et cetera. So if we start looking at the computer, we built that and we spent decades building it. But in a way, am I right in this analogy that we discovered that nature around us wasn't just created by the gods or God, depending on what you believe, but there is actually computer code in it. So it would be the equivalent of Christopher Columbus maybe showing up in the New World and finding a MacBook Pro and having to figure out, how does a MacBook Pro work? And what is it? What's inside of it? Is that what's happening right now?
Yeah, that's a decent analogy. Yeah, I would agree with that. Except we also figured out like how to load bits directly into the MacBook Pro.
Right.
We didn't have higher order programming languages or anything, but you could feed that thing zeros and ones and just see what happens.
Right.
And you're like, have fun, right? And that's sort of where we are with biology today. It is unbelievably powerful, right? Like this is the other thing that is completely lost on people because they take biology for granted, right? Like you grow up with a pet dog, you got a garden, you have all this stuff, right? Like think about planting a seed, right? You add air, water, and sunlight. This thing freakishly self-assembles out of thin air, placing atoms, with molecular precision, building solar panels, right? All for free, with no manufacturing. So what kind of crazy technology is that, right? And
what's
again,
in the seed?
Seriously, like think of it as a technologist. And to me, it's always felt like it's almost like it's alien technology, right? And your analogy is spot on. What we figured out really in the last, really starting in 78 with the invention of genetic engineering, the ability to basically cut and paste DNA from one organism to another that led to Genentech and human insulin and the beginnings of the biotech industry. And then followed up in the early 2000s with the Human Genome Project to start to read DNA at scale. We got the ability to read and write into this kind of alien tech. And yeah, it's really powerful, but yeah, you're correct. We didn't design it. And so that's the core challenge of biological engineering. It's like a reverse engineering discipline. You're trying to understand how these things work because you know they can do amazing things if you could just put in the right code, right? And so does that make sense in terms of the...
It makes total sense. And when you look at that human genome that we sequenced 20 years ago and our ability to sequence it now, how has that changed in terms of order of magnitude, cost, and time? Because that was a multi-year project that we were being given updates on. It was like, any year now we're going to finish.
Yeah.
To do our human genome, how much would it cost to sequence it now?
Yeah. So the first human genome, like all in, was probably about $100 million if you think of like just the sequencing part of it. And today, Illumina is the US company, and then Beijing Genomics in China are sort of at around $100 a human genome. So you've seen a 1 million fold cost reduction in the last, 21 years here, right? So that puts Moore's law to shame in terms of improvement rate, if you want to think of it that way.
And if that would continue at any kind of a pace, it would be $1 or essentially free.
Yeah.
It's going to be free to know my genome or yours. But now when we look at that genome, of the genome, what do we actually understand? Because it seems to me that we understand just a fraction of what's going on in there. And then I wonder, how do we identify what is happening in each genome and in each gene?
Yeah, well, I'll make it even simpler for you. Take you have a 4 billion, it's a $4 billion letter genome. Bacteria is 3 million letters, right? So like a little E. coli bacteria, it's a single cell, right? We don't know how that thing works, right? And the entirety of that organism is one cell. Okay, a human, you're trillions, bacteria and your human cells, and all interacting with each other. Like the whole thing it's complexity on complexity on complexity, right? So no, right? Like wait, it is not. And in fact, like just Jason, like. We came, the origins of the field, like back when synthetic biology got going, like in the early 2000s, like the modern form of it. It was a bunch of like engineers and computer scientists. There's a lot of early grounding in computational analogies, like the programming I mentioned. But it's important to realize that while a cell is programmable, like a computer, in other words, you can put in different code, it is not predictable like a computer, right? It is, like, it's not even the right analogy. It's not a giant clock. Right. And so even as we seek to understand these things, just know you're not going to quite understand them the way you think of a computer or a car. Right. Because that's there's too much human in there. Right. Like we had to simplify those things because we're too dumb, right. And so we needed to oversimplify it to make the engineering make sense. Like biology's had 4 billion years just to work at this shit. And so they just the way it designs things, and think about think about your brain, right? Everyone's always on about, artificial general intelligence, blah, 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 blah. We literally have that in biology sitting in your head right now. It's running on almost no energy. What is going on, right? And so the way that when we get in and understand biology better, it's not going to be a direct mapping to how other engineering fields got built out, in my opinion. It's going to look different. Probably going to teach us how to design other things better, in my opinion. Think of neural nets. Already like that.
Yeah. So in a way, our framework of thinking about the world, what humans are capable of conceiving of and keeping in our brains, biology might be more sophisticated than what we can even keep in our brains.
Might be. I mean, this is the thing. Just look at it on first principles. It is, right? It just is. It's our arrogance that prevents us from seeing it. But yes, it is.
So in a way, it is like the universe. We try to think that we know what's going on in the universe through all kinds of different techniques, but we haven't even left our planet to visit another planet. We got to the moon, basically, or sent some probes to different places. So when we do flip switches, walk me through that process of starting to learn about a human genome, or even corn, or a horse, whatever it is. Yeah,
sure. Yeah,
How does that actually work? When you go to work in the morning, do you say okay, we haven't tried this section, let's flip some switches here and see what happens? How do you go about discovering what can be done?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll teach you to be a novice cell programmer today, Jason. So you can go home and do some hacking later. All right. So I'll give you an example of a project we have. We have and by the way Ginkgo's business works is we're cell programmers for hire.
Got it.
Okay, right? So I'm sitting in front of like a 200,000 square foot compiler and debugger for genetic code here in Boston. It's like robotic automation doing what I did back in grad school. And then we use that machine to basically program a cell to meet a customer spec. And then we give it to them and we make money like kind of like Apple would make money in the App Store, right? Like we get like a royalty or equity in their company or some reach into the value of the app.
That's a fascinating business model. So what's an example of a company that sends you on a mission like this?
All right. So I'll give you what I like. So there's a company called Kronos up in Canada. It's a Canadian cannabis company. All right. Altria owns like half of this company. And the way that you make cannabis products today is you grow cannabis plants, right? And so these guys, they got a giant, like greenhouse up there in Canada and all this infrastructure. And you have to do this whole elaborate thing with the lighting and all this stuff to make, this little flower at the bud. And then from that, you're going to extract these cannabinoids that go into all kinds of different things, edibles, whatever. All right. Well, that's, those cannabinoids are made with biology. So just to state the obvious, there is code inside the cannabis plant that defines the little proteins, which are like basically little pieces of nanotechnology that are little chemists putting together the molecules that make like CBD, for example. Okay. And so the plant builds that molecule using proteins encoded in the code of the plant. So you, as the cell programmer who's been given the job of, hey, could we, instead of having to grow all those plants, run like a brewery, like you would use to brew beer, all right? And we're going to take brewer's yeast and we're going to have it make the CBD. And we're going to do it by basically taking the code that we learned from the plant and moving it into the yeast and having it read the code, because it's cheaper to run a brewery than to have this giant greenhouse and all this stuff to make this little bit of oil. Okay. And so that's your spec. How do you do it? All right. Number one, look in the plant and find the part of the genome that produces those cannabinoids. And so there's like, call it 6 or 7 genes that are needed. All right. Now, your first thing you might do is just cut and paste it. Cool. Grab it, print it, right? Which, by the way, like DNA printing literally means I'm like ATCGGG. I'm typing on my computer here. Hit print. And then out of a machine behind me or from a company like Twist Biosciences out in California will come the piece of DNA you asked for. All right. So you get you read the DNA using DNA genomics. You found the code. You put it in the computer. You hit print. Now you got it. And you open the genome of the yeast. So you might have heard of tools like CRISPR, right?
Yep,
CRISPR is basically a tool to cut a genome at a certain location and open it. So you open it up and then you put in that DNA you just printed. And now you grow it in a cell and guess what it does? Nothing. It doesn't work. Okay. Right. So because you can't just cut and paste it in from the plant, of course, that's not going to work. Right. So what do you have to do? Just like a computer programmer would, you got to debug that code. So if you're going to go and you're going to look and you're going to say, all right, is the first gene the problem? The second gene the problem? The third? There's 6 of them. Which one's the issue? And you're going to use sophisticated like analytical equipment to like rip that cell open and look at what's being made. And you're like, oh, the third gene is the problem. Okay, let's fix it. So you're going to go and look in these big genome databases. There's like big public genome databases. You could log onto it right now. It's called GenBank. And you'll put in that sequence and you'll say, hey, find me sequences that look like this from out in the wide world of nature. And you'll find 1,000 other versions of gene number 3. Put them in the computer, hit print. They'll come out. You'll put all those into yeast and you'll see that version number 507 fixed your problem. Okay. So now gene 3 is fixed, but guess what? Gene 4 is screwed up. And you're going to go through that process just like a programmer would, iterating through, ultimately, in our case, hundreds of thousands of designs until you finally make one that, just like Kronos announced last week, they're doing now commercial production of CBG, but like that hits what they want to hit to bring it to market. And so that's an example of a cell programming project for a customer. And that's one scope. Yeah.
The goal of this is to make that cannabinoid or CBD, whatever, in order to not have to plant a bunch of plants.
Yeah. Lower the cost of goods, more scalable supply, that sort of thing. Yeah. More control.
So that's one example. That's one example. And then could we also then decide, well, we want to make a strain that doesn't make you tired, but that does give you creativity and makes you less paranoid. Asking for a friend.
Yeah. No, I hear you. Yeah. I mean, there is a bunch of work on the therapeutic side of the house, actually. Because if you think about, there are many classes of medicines that come out of plant natural products, right? So like, the whole category of anesthetics, for example, a lot of those came out of plant, opioid, things like that. And so like exploring around that molecular structure is something that you see companies starting to do pharmaceutically. For the recreational use, it's basically just use things that are already in the.
Now, part of this is possible because some part of the process is being automated.
Yeah.
Tell us about the automation that's occurred and how much faster you can go today than maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, so this is a lot of what Ginkgo's kind of core technology is. So, like, I'll tell you a funny story from back when we were at MIT. So one of my co-founders is this fellow, Tom Knight, right? And Tom Knight's like, I don't know if you know the old school, like he's an old school legendary like computer scientist from like the hackers book era of like mini computer era, MIT AI lab the first time around kind of thing. Worked with Stallman, the whole thing, and so Tom's lab, like he did computer, taught the semiconductor design course for years. He started at MIT in the early 70s, and in the 90s he decides cells run on code. I'm a good, I've been developing programming tools. Like I'm going to learn biology and try to help out. And so like Tom gets in and like gets his feet wet, but he would also attract all these computer scientists who are like, oh my God, DNA is code. This is so cool, Tom. Like, let's do it. And Tom be like, great. There's the lab. I go there every morning and work all day long, on trying to do this. And these people would go in the lab and like 2 weeks later, they'd burn out completely because you're like, oh my God, I ran an experiment today and then I do the same experiment tomorrow and I get a different result. I came from a world of pure math and logic in computers, and like this is not that; it is a nightmare, right? And like we would just flush out.
Feels like
people.
Alchemy more than
crazy.
Science.
Yeah, and it was enormously frustrating to that. And here's the reason Tom powered through it. By the way, Tom came from an era of computing where computers were like that. Tom
they were unpredictable.
On punch cards. Yes. He had to fix computers to make his code work.
Paper jam.
You had to be an electrical engineer to be a computer programmer back then, right? Like Tom programmed on mainframes, right? Like so he's old enough to realize we like did a lot of work to make it as easy to program computers today as it is. And he was like, it's fine. This is digital code. We'll power through it. And so one of the things we had to fix was that by hand lab work that was associated with like compiling and debugging code, Jason. Like literally, if you wanted to compile some code, it's like, you're like a chef all of a sudden. It's like, get in the lab, do this precious protocol, do it exactly right. One mistake and it won't work. And you're like, I just wanted to load some code in and see even if it was going to work in the first place, right? So what we've done is we've taken all those protocols and moved them, standardized them. We move them onto robotics and automation, and we run it like a factory. So to answer your question, in 5 years, each year, we've been roughly tripling the output of the facility and having the cost per lab operation annually. Okay. So 2 to the 5th better than we were 5 years ago.
Wow.
And that's why we're now able to do millions of designs, right? Today, compared to benchmarking with a scientist at the bench, we're about 5 to 10 times cheaper on a per lab operation basis. And
tell me without telling me the name of the customer, tell me a project that people came to you and you said, too soon. Not possible.
Yeah.
But come back to us next year or in 2 years and let's continue the discussion, or, hey, we can do 10% of that. Yeah.
So there's a number of products. So if it's there's a lot of interest in the, in sort of like the petrochemical side of the world, like to move off plastics and things like that. And like the cost point for a lot of that stuff used to make it infeasible. In other words, like it was just sort of like, it's too inexpensive compared to the cost of fermenting. You need something higher priced, like a cannabinoid or like a therapeutic or, blah, blah, blah. And so I think that's starting to change. Like and in fact, it's not just changing because of the technology. You're also seeing consumer preference start to fix that. Right. Like customer, like you have certain brands who are saying like, I can't have this like spandex or this stuff in my really high end product that, like people don't like the microplastics, the whole thing. Like we need to fix this, and they're willing to pay more for it. I think that's going to start to pull that into existence. In a way, that's
what happened with the Impossible Burger. You had 100%. People who were like, I don't want to eat a cow. I am opposed to it. On
20 years ago, that
reasons.
Product wouldn't have worked, Yeah, exactly.
And then now it's like, if you told me people would pay 3 times as much for a burger that didn't taste as good as a burger and that was made from whatever soybeans, no offense to people who love them, but it's not even close to a great hamburger.
Yeah.
I would say it's 70%. I shouldn't say it's not close. It's actually, I don't know. Where would you put it at in terms of like,
I mean, I'm a meat eater.
and
Yeah. So
70%?
I love burgers. Yeah.
Exactly.
I used to get burgers.
It was $15, right? Wasn't it $15 when they first came out? And they were losing money at $15.
Yeah. So here's the secret to the Impossible Burger. The reason I love it, and I'll tell you about a company we've been working with too in this area. But like, so you bite into that Impossible Burger, and it is the best veggie burger I've ever had. Right? In other words, like it's nowhere like
best
compared to like a
veggie burger you've ever had. Better than a garden burger.
But here's the interesting part, Jason. You bite into it, like you go to Burger King, Impossible Whopper, it bleeds.
Yes.
And like, that's a little weird, right? There's not a lot of blood in plants. Like, how are they doing that? And what Impossible has done, exactly what we just talked about for cannabis. They took the yeast, like they used to make beer. They found the gene for hemoglobin, which is the protein that makes blood red. They put it in the yeast. They brew it up. Instead of beer coming out, heme comes out. And then they add that to a veggie burger. And suddenly it smells right, tastes right. It's a Impossible Whopper.
Wow.
It's because of that hemoglobin.
So they basically made beer bleed so that we can feel like barbarians and wolves.
Without having to kill a cow. Yeah.
Wow.
Right?
Literally, we can rip. I mean, they could make us feel like cannibals again. We could go back. I mean, I know it's dark, but literally we could be.
I think this
you
stuff is
could
fascinating.
sequence a human hamburger and be a cannibal. Hannibal Lecter would not need to be a serial killer anymore. It's so dark.
That is dark. Yeah. I mean, you might go for like some more of like the out there animals first before you went straight
exactly.
to the human.
I mean, if you think about it,
eagle eggs or something,
gras,
Yeah,
I had foie gras the other night, and I forgot how foie gras is made, not to be graphic. And I had a little bit of a crisis.
Yeah, I always turn it down. Yeah, no, I don't like it.
But I forgot, like I hadn't had it in so many years. I was like, oh, foie gras, I'm at Raoul's. Let's go. I'm going to have the steak frites and the foie gras. Let's do it. And then I ate it and I was like, oh, I shouldn't have ordered that.
Yes.
But it was delicious. Yeah. But we can make foie gras.
But guiltless. Yes.
Guiltless foie gras is extraordinary. So I get that. Microplastics and stuff like that.
We have a company called Motif. There's a company that was built on our platform. So one of the cool things that's starting to happen is like, you know this from the internet industry, right? But like back in the day, it was expensive to launch an internet company. Right?
Sure.
Like you had to get servers and all this stuff.
You had to rack them,
upfront costs.
Stack and rack. Let's go.
Yeah, nowadays it's like nothing, right? Well, today with biotech, it's still that era of build your own servers. Like, oh, you want to go after like, a new animal free meat? Then cool. Open a 1,500 square foot lab, buy $1 million of equipment, get all the, right? Like get a bunch of lab supplies and all this upfront cost, right? And so what we're doing now at Ginkgo is we're saying, actually, if you want to start a new company, don't build any of that. Just outsource it to our lab cloud here. We'll do it for you. And so there's a company called Motif Foodworks that's basically making animal proteins, egg proteins, milk proteins, blah, blah, the things like we were just talking about. They started 2.5 years ago on the platform. They just announced last week, they raised $226 million.
Wow.
This company's 35 people. They have no lab. They've just been using us the whole time.
So you're like their Amazon Web Services, your outsource cloud. It's so awesome. I mean, we had George Zachary on the program, who's actually now retiring from Charles River's Venture, and is working on the company Wild Type, I think, making crispy salmon.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I know Wild Type.
He said like the thing that they were struggling with their salmon was it didn't have the crispy, snappy kind of, skin feel or whatever after being grilled. And that was their blocker.
Huh.
So your business model is to get a little bit of equity or a licensing fee when they make those things.
Yep, you got it. Yep.
Wow. That would be like if Amazon Web Services was like, yeah, you can put Slack on here, but we just want 1% of your equity or 2% of your equity for it.
Exactly like that. Yep.
Let's go to ethics and morality here, which is where these discussions always go.
Yeah.
There's no organization telling you, correct me if I'm wrong, you just crossed the line, and there is no line officially. Or is there?
So, yeah, I mean, there is in various ways. So if you want to bring out a product, there is a lot, there's a whole existing regulatory apparatus that wraps around that. So like if Impossible Foods wants to bring out that burger with that hemoglobin, they were going to go talk to FDA, USDA.
Okay, so there is antiquated architecture for the real world or the non-synthetic biology world that is now being applied to this area.
At the point of the product, yes.
At the product point.
Yeah,
but
in other words, like once it's going to go, Correct. Yeah. In our lab, we have safety. Like, in other words, there's like biosafety level. In other words, like
OSHA.
Lab safety. Exactly. Yeah. Like OSHA. Yep. Yeah. There's OSHA. And then there is, at the level of the DNA synthesis companies who are printing the DNA, there is a international organization that's basically has like a list of things that you're not supposed to print. Okay. Like, don't print smallpox, that kind of thing. And so, and if something gets flagged off that, there's a cycle that goes to engage with government folks and stuff like that. And so that is one point of checking. But like, at the end of the day, you know, that you're going to see, I think synthesis is not, you know, it could end up on people's bench tops. It's not like it's not a great way to limit it, you know? So I don't think that that's the strongest form of, like, we've been thinking about this a lot, like, just to state the obvious, like, COVID-19 was not a great event for humanity, right? And so, it was a great tipping point in humanity, in that we realized with mRNA and with coordination, the world could solve a problem. So you could take the other side of it. I hear you on this. Yes, yeah. I strongly agree with this. Yeah. And so which, by the way, like, you know, it's code, right? Like this is the other thing that's amazing, like an amazing moment for science biology, which is like, we suddenly have common language around the world to talk about this. Like, people know what mRNA is. They get that, like, you know, it got us out of this mess by basically having the cells in your body read some code, make a protein, turn on your immune system, and like, you get to go outside again, you know, right? Like that's actually very visceral and important, I think, coming up in terms of like how the public thinks about the ability to program cells, right? But to answer your question about like ethics, safety, security, I do think one of the things I'm hopeful happens in the context of COVID is far more robust biosecurity, right? So it's kind of like if you were to think about like PayPal with fraud detection or Gmail with cybersecurity, right? Like, biosecurity should come up right alongside our capabilities to engineer biology in order to do this responsibly. And COVID represents a moment where it's like, well, it's a good idea to build this right now because it helps open economies. It helps avoid a wave in the fall. Like, why not? Like, you have a perfect moment to build out like really robust biosecurity tools that then, in my opinion, will serve us very well as we enter, you know, the next 50 years of making it cheaper and easier until your kids are programming cells someday. Like, we want to do that with robust biosecurity wrapped around us. And I think we have a unique moment in the next 2 years to do that on the back of like vaccines and surveillance testing.
With, not to be hysterical or hyperbolic, but just on a pragmatic basis, you know, we had COVID-19 sequenced very quickly, published to the web. Everybody knows what it is. The machine behind you costs a couple $100,000. And could somebody now, a bad actor, be able to just take that sequence and say, yeah, let's make it more viral and flip some switches. Let's make it more deadly. And how realistic is that? And does that keep you up at night?
Well, I would say for now, the tools, like there's been obviously a ton of discussion around this just in the context of like the lab in China and everything else. But like the whole category of like the gain of function research has been a hot topic in biosecurity for 25 years. You know, it's not a new topic, right? And so like, I think what I'm more scared of is, I think because we haven't had an event of this magnitude when it came to an infectious disease since literally 1918. Right. It's been like 100 years since a virus put the whole world on its butt. Right. And you might have imagined that with like our modern infrastructure, we wouldn't be susceptible anymore. Right. Like, that would have been a reasonable thing to think. I mean, plenty of biosecurity people didn't think that, but like, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, we didn't know anything in 1918. You kidding me? You know, right. Like, think about it. And yet
here we are.
Right.
And in fact, arguably it's worse. Yeah.
You know, yes, it is in certain ways, right? Travel, right? Like blah, blah, right? And so it's that, what I get more scared of is the awareness of the susceptibility. And then that means that you don't need fancy stuff. You just need to do the same sort of junk you could have done before, but now you feel like, oh, well, it might actually work if you're like a bad actor. And so that to me is another reason we want to muscle up biosecurity, is so that we reset back to a footing of like, you can try it, but it ain't going to work, you know, and then you have less incentive to try, right?
It's different than nuclear, because in the nuclear industry, you need plutonium. What would you need? Plutonium, whatever. You need some fissile materials.
There's choke points. Yes.
There's choke points where the materials are hard to get at, but in biology, we don't have that equivalent.
Correct.
So then it would be licensing these machines, and whoever made them,
much closer to software.
Much closer to software.
Like you need to have like a footing that looks more similar to cybersecurity.
Wow. which has been a total
and by the way, public
failure.
health, right? Like, I mean, again, like the upshot of this, by the way, Jason, my view is in the interest of our national security in the United States, richest country in the world, we ought to just eliminate infectious disease worldwide. It's still killing millions of people every year, in other countries. Like, let us just build it, like build the shield, build like perfect biosecurity. It's just going to look like the ability to eliminate infectious disease. That's smart, right? Like that is
and it's
good
within
defense
our
footing
ability now.
Yes, in my opinion, it is.
To build the dome. Basically, we can build a dome like Israel has, like against rockets.
But for the whole world, because at the end of the day, you can't keep it out of your borders. We saw that, right?
Yeah, I mean, we could have, I guess, shut down like New Zealand did and Taiwan and other places. But it feels like the world's too interconnected to do that. Now, in terms of your own, it's an incredible framework to look at it. In terms of your own line, certainly somebody has come to you and you said, yeah, that's an interesting idea, but we don't want to participate in that.
Yeah.
For whatever reason.
Yeah.
What would be the things that if people came to you and said, hey, we want to create this, and you'd say, not for us. Maybe some other people have a different or ethical or moral line, but that's not for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a fortunate position where, like, worldwide there is a biological weapons convention, and I don't think there is like nation states developing weapons today, other than like rumors in North Korea and stuff like that. People that are really not playing by the rules, but that would be the brightest line. I think that's just but
people haven't obviously come to you with that. So are there things? Well, let me ask you another way.
Yeah,
are there things people came to you and you said,
yeah. So an example would be greening the process of making explosives.
Greening the process of making explosives. So organic, free range bombs.
Yeah, because they make, there's big Superfund sites from when you go off to try to make, the chemicals that go into explosives, right? But feels to me a little close to weaponizing biology to see more of it.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So a green bomb, like a military application.
Correct. Yeah. And I think it's just worth making, like, in my view, the right play here. And again, this is like different domains, cyber, nuclear. You need to approach them differently because they are different, right? And so
very different.
So biology is like, it's like a holy one, right? Like we're made out of biology. Like just tread carefully, right? Like and so
be thoughtful.
I think there's like just a very healthy just really keep a big bright line. We're like, we want to do is like sink a ton into public health and make like a dome of public health security for the whole world that basically ends infectious disease. And while it's at it, ends biological weapons. That's a great line of work.
Wow. I mean, fantastic.
What we don't want to do is like end up with an arms race, right? Right? Like that's a mistake.
Big mistake.
Yeah. Because this isn't our tech.
Tried that. We did that before.
Just remember, Jason, you're working with alien technology. So it isn't the same, right? Like you don't know how far it could go because it's not yours, right? So that's why you don't want to go play there, in my opinion, like collectively on the planet. We gotta be careful.
You must talk about the movies like Prometheus and Aliens and the engineers in your industry.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Ridley Scott, and when they wrote those, they came to folks like you to do their research. But it is like...
that stuff's so cool.
In the movie Prometheus, I think, is such a masterpiece that nobody appreciates because it was just a little too heady and didn't have the aliens in it. But when they drink that little fluid, when you were talking about a seed propagating, the first thing I thought of is the opening scene of Prometheus when they go to a planet, which is obviously Earth, spoiler alert, and the engineer drinks some fluid and decomposes into the river to start the cycle on Earth.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, I'm a big fan of any weird bio movies in general. Yeah,
so what about, it's pretty clear, like if we're going to work on making a better burger, nobody complains. There seems to be really super easy decision to make. But what about when we start looking at the human body itself and start thinking about changing our genes and flipping switches?
Yeah.
Where are we at with that? And how does the market look at that? Because we did have somebody in China decide they were going to flip some genes in, I think, a pair of twins in order to make them resistant to HIV, which seems like, wow, what a great idea.
Yeah.
Except you just freely admitted that, maybe half the time you don't know what switches are going on and you have to do multiple experiments, which we're starting to get into Frankenstein territory here. Yeah.
Yeah. People ask about it all the time. I mean, my basic view on this is, I think people underestimate how quickly like non-human cell engineering is going to become a big deal, right? Like it's getting so much faster and easier. Like our whole, like the majority of our world is physical, right? And so like this is the programmable, like in the same way, like, a computer moves information around, it's programmable. So if you think about like what industries it disrupted, it was like, media, telecom, finance. Well, it was all information based, right? What didn't it disrupt? Hamburgers, right? Because like hamburgers don't have that many bits in them, right? And now the cells are programmable. Honest to God, you put different code in, they do different things, but they don't move information, they move atoms. And so they're going to go after all the physical goods industries, food, medicine, building materials, electronics, like go down the list, right? They're all biotech industries. They just don't know it. And so like, I think there's like this big wave coming there that nobody really sees coming. All they think about is medicine when they think biotech, but there's all these other things. Okay. But the human side, I honestly think people are going to be incredibly conservative there, right? Like they'll use it for treatments. Like there was just a great result earlier this week of a gene editing treatment that had a very good clinical trial result that suggests, that as hey, I've got a genetic disease. I take a drug that edits my gene and fixes that problem in my liver or whatever is actually looking very promising. That's exciting. I think people do that left and right. I'll change the genes in my kid. I doubt it, right? Because like it's your kid, right? Like you gotta live with, if you get it wrong. Like so there's such a bar to that, and our lack of understanding. People immediately jump to the Gattaca stuff, but like I just think that's like 100 years off. Whereas like
really 100 years before we start messing with our own DNA and making ourselves taller, stronger, better, smarter.
Yeah, I just think people aren't going to mess with their kids. That's what I think. Yeah, in an unpredictable way. Like, do you want yours to be the first? Right? Like it's hard to test, and there's no like the predictability of it sucks, right? Like so there's just I think it's going to be slower, that in my opinion. But I think the other stuff is going to be faster. Right. And so it's going to get weirder on.
Are we doing it with other living creatures and looking at we are. So like, are people taking insects or mice and flipping these genes? And then what are we learning there? You don't do that.
Like cancer has been cured many times in mice, right? Like, they are a place to learn what might work in humans. I think that's accurate, but they are not perfect models. And they certainly, again, aren't something that I think you'd mess with. I think probably the best thing you're going to get is like broad human genome sequencing. So you're going to get all these little studies that like compare a bunch of people and on different genes. But like, even after you sequence everybody, it's just not that much data, right? Like, there's only so many, what is it, 8 billion people? Like so there's 8 billion data points across a 3 billion letter genome with all these changes, right? And the complexity of a body that also includes your upbringing and 50 other things. And it's like, it's too sparse, right? It's like too sparse to bet your kid on. And so like, I think that makes it's going to take longer than people think. Yeah.
So would it be unethical to then try to bring back, is the Jurassic Park question you get all the time at Thanksgiving or whatever holiday? It does seem probable that we could bring back some species, maybe not dinosaurs or woolly mammoths, but some.
Yeah. Yes, I do think it's very probable. Yes. I think you can get, and I'll make one last point just because I thought of it on the human thing. The only other thing I would say about that one, just to keep in the back of your head, is like, it's also just a much bigger question, right? Like, in other words, like there's just a bigger societal conversation about that would need to come for it to also get off the ground. Like it's like ask your priest, like it's like it's a more complicated topic because it's humans.
We're really getting into that. Yeah.
Every other type of bioengineering doesn't have that problem, right? So it's like literally like the human piece is very unique, and then the rest of it is very different. There are also ethical concerns there, but they are supremely different than when you deal with humans. I just wanted to flag that. But okay, so
I do think that's actually worth meditating on for a second, which is there is a risk analysis and a cost benefit, and then you get into morality and should we even be messing with that, and God and who created us. Like it does open up a massive can of words.
Correct.
But we don't actually think about increasing our joy, increasing the experience of people who are not sick. It's really interesting in science how everything is about curing some disease or lowering some pain as opposed to increasing joy or making people more intelligent or making people happier, whatever it is. That's the one I always find peculiar. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of industry focused on like trying to make us more joyful. Yeah, I mean, I go back and forth on it. Right?
We have like we have
in medicine,
SRIs, right? And we have, people are studying MDMA and like, oh, let's make people have more serotonin and Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I honestly feel like in a lot of ways our economy is like overly focused on that kind of stuff, right? Like how much of the economy actually flows through like mostly trying to like entertain and, right? Like it's interesting. So I agree with you on the medical side, but I would say like collectively we spend a lot on that. So what about the woolly mammoth thing?
Okay. All right. Yes. So you're definitely going to get a mammoth. I think that's the
mammoth's a layup.
That's a layup. Yeah. The dinosaurs are hard because they are too old. So like DNA doesn't last long enough, but birds are dinosaurs, right? So like they didn't die out. They just turned into birds. So it's like the raptor lineage is birds. And so if you look at birds, like they're close. So like close, the right change, if you spend enough time working with birds, you probably get one to look like a dinosaur. Yeah. So that's probably the shortest path.
You guys went public recently.
We are SPACing. Yeah.
So talk about that concept, because it feels like you're very early. And is this, do people who are investing in a company like yours, should they look at it like a venture investment and really swinging for the fences? And how do you make that decision? Because there's an unlimited amount of capital in private markets right now. You're choosing to go public where you're like the tip of the spear in like this new industry. How did you make that decision with it being too early, or maybe it's great that everybody gets to participate in this?
Yeah, so a part of it is that actually, there hasn't been this model of like all the value accruing to the sort of like private investor community and not grow, and it's more recent phenomenon. It's more like a Facebook phenomenon than like an Amazon phenomenon, right? Like Amazon grew on the public markets, right? And so part of me is like philosophically wants to basically get more people in the public involved, right? Like I think it feels good to me. And then it was like our sector, in my opinion, right, is like, it's the right time to have the public conversation, right? So like right now we're merging with a SPAC called Soaring Eagle. Once the merger's complete, we'll trade under like the ticker DNA, which used to be like Genentech's ticker. And like, which is like, I'm so proud of it. So cool. And like, this is it, right? Like to me, like I'm not gonna, like even COVID, like push some of this. Like we did a project with Moderna, like we've done a lot in the last year and a half around like vaccine supply chain, all this stuff. And like, I think there's like a moment right now where like the public is ready to hear about this stuff. Public markets are supportive of our industry. Like we did a $775 million pipe. The SPAC's got $1.75 billion in it. Like this gives us like ammo to scale the heck out of this place. And then we are inflecting. Like we've just started we announced a deal with Biogen recently. We're doing more and more in therapeutics. And so like I can use the capital, right? And so like it was like the right mix of, it felt like the right time on the investor side. It was good access to capital. And I liked the SPAC because it was like faster, right? Like the process was just like, the IPO process, like I was going to like lobotomize my team for like the whole year. And this was like, we were done basically. And the SPAC or the pipe got done in 2 weeks. And then we've been mostly back to building things. And so like, I liked it. Yeah.
Who makes all the hardware you use? There's now, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're AWS, you don't have to make the servers. There's some, in the AWS equivalent, there's somebody in Taiwan, there's somebody in, India, and there's somebody in China competing to sell them servers, memory chips, whatever it is, hard drives. Yep. And so has that happened in your industry where now you have people coming to Ginkgo and saying, hey, we got a better one, faster, cheaper, and what's that industry shaping up like? The hardware side, the machines.
For sure, yeah. So there's different halves of it. There's sort of like generic automation. So the good thing about that is we're increasingly climbing the automation curve of just industrial automation. Like it doesn't need to be lab automated. Like you look at our new facility and it's like, there's like mag tracks with stuff flying around and green arms and like, it's all like much more like various automation taken from even outside of lab automation just to drive scale. So
basically what happened in factories to make products is now in the lab to do what you're doing. To
compile and debug code, right? And then we do have like specific suppliers like Twist, or Berkeley Lights, both out in California, who are like, we have really close relationships with them because we're their biggest customers by like a substantial fraction. And so then we do co-develop, right? Like we're like, okay, what can we do to make it, better on the synthesis side, right? And that is a little more of like what you're talking about, where we do mutually beneficial. Yeah.
Is there something out there that could become a massive accelerant in this whole space, where we could see a huge jump in, even beyond Moore's law? But is there something out there that could make all of this, go 10 years faster or 100 years faster?
Yes.
That people are working on. I mean, quantum computing comes up, et cetera. Yeah.
Here's the cool part about biology. So, okay, we talked earlier about like how you're a novice cell programmer, like put that DNA in the genome, right? And you have to find a location, open the genome up, and put the DNA in. And in higher organisms like plants and animals, like I'll explain how we did it in plants for years. They had a thing called a gene gun, which was gold-plated nanoparticles with pieces of DNA hanging on them, shot ballistically through a plant. They would go through the cell wall, hit the genome, like cut it, and like attach it in random locations. It would be like kind of like loading code just at random locations in memory on your computer and hoping it doesn't break anything. Yeah. Literally, okay. And so clearly that's not super efficient, but that was like the best we had. And we got, I don't even know what the right number is, 100,000 times better at it a few years ago. Why? CRISPR. Did someone work on that? No. Someone found it. So the magic of biology, remember, it's alien technology, Jason. What could make it go faster in 10 years? Someone might just go in the frickin' woods and find a piece of advanced technology. Like, it's wild, and so there
crazy.
Crazy, just crazy. And so like, being on the lookout for that sort of thing, I think it creates these like disruptive, like accelerants to the whole field. And like, even like, like that DNA sequencer that Illumina has that, or like Oxford Nanopore out in the UK, these like, that do these cheap genomes. You know what's in the middle of that thing? That Oxford Nanopore, it's a protein nanopore. It is stolen from biology. Like the meat of this machine is actually a little protein that sucks the DNA through letter by letter. Wow. So it's like half biology, half electronics, right? And so like that's crazy. Where it's going, right? Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. So knowing what you know about biology, do you think there is, when we look at alien life and we look at the Goldilocks zone, it has to exist at this temperature, et cetera. Do you think we actually are correct? And where would you stand on extraterrestrial life and life in the universe?
Oh, it's got to be life. Yeah, I mean,
gotta be life.
Yeah. It's not,
And it doesn't need to. Do you think it has to exist? Do you think it needs to exist in the zone that we can comprehend? I.e., we kind of believe it has to exist in this temperature range. It has to exist on these planets, et cetera. Like, in these conditions, oxygen, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm not enough of a student of that to know. Yeah. But like, I think you basically get to call life anything that replicates and passes information, I think probably digitally, but at least with high fidelity to its offspring. And like, if it can do that and it can mutate,
we're off to the races.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Listen, continued success.
Hey, thanks.
It's amazing to have you out there working on this. Thank you for making better plants, et cetera. And I didn't ask you about GMOs. Yeah. You got all these people in Europe and hippie dippies here in America who are like, it's GMO, it's bad. Yeah. But we've been modifying stuff like hybrid and corn for thousands of years, I believe, to make the corn more productive. And we did it with animals and livestock. Yeah. How do you look at GMOs? And if you're genetically modifying stuff as the core of what you do, this
we print
GMO.
more DNA than anywhere on planet Earth, dude.
What do you think about that anti-GMO kind of moment that we've had for the last, whatever it is, 2 or 3 decades? I mean, in Europe, they banned GMO foods in certain places, right?
I think about it a lot. Yeah. So I'll give you, and by the way, like we have, we have a $100 million joint venture with Bayer Crop Science to engineer microbes to produce fertilizer for crops as an example of like one of our cell programming projects, right? And so like we do stuff in ag. It's a great industry. Remember there's like a GMO labeling debate like 5 years ago in the US about like whether there should be a national label. And so at the time it was like all the industry, no. And like I did a New York Times editorial that was like, I run a GMO company. I think we should label GMOs. And the idea was like the scientist and engineer view is like, hey, these things are safe, which, there's been a trillion meals eaten. Like we just need to educate people, or another safety study that they'll just have to understand it. But it isn't an issue of safety. It's an issue of trust, right? Like there's a powerful technology being deployed. Do you trust the people deploying it to be acting in your interests? And when you frame it that way, well, what's one of the best ways to eliminate trust is to be like, oh yeah, hey, I want to know, is this in my food? Because I'm going to eat it and give it to my kids. You're like, no, I'm not going to tell you. Right? Like, surprise. Why? Oh, because it's so safe that you shouldn't have to know. Right? Yeah. And it's like this crazy illogical, and so then of course we passed GMO labeling. And people bought more GM, right? It's only gone up. Like after they passed it in Vermont and stuff, like the amount people were buying increased because and so our view on things is like we have like I Heart GMO shirts. It's like we should be proud of it. Like, and the kind
we should
of person
have I Heart like nuclear power shirts. Like literally the No Nukes concert, which was a fantastic concert. Like there was a lot of great people who played it. Yeah. Like set back the environmental movement and obviously contributed to global warming.
Yeah, I mean, my
we
view
literally deprecated the best way to fight global warming in all likelihood.
It is a very interesting thing. Yeah, I mean, I think like my view on it is the kind of person who wants to see this label, who cares about what's in their products and in their food, is ultimately the person who is going to want more cell engineering, right? Because biology is just a better way to make stuff. Right? Like if you think about how we did it with the Industrial Revolution, we basically dig a hole in the ground, extract something, oil or some material, run it through a big factory, use it for a little bit, and then throw it in the landfill. And our whole big plan is like the hole will never run out. Yes. Right? And whereas biology for 4 billion years has been making more stuff than any of our other industries. Yeah. Think about like global jungles and everything. Biology is amazing manufacturing, totally plays well with the planet. And like, we should just use it to make everything. And the answer is like, well, once we get good at programming it, we will. And those kinds of folks will be the first people in line for it because it makes everything renewable, right?
Literally the same group that would be complaining about GMOs are the ones going and ordering the Impossible Burger.
And that's a great thing. And it's because Impossible was transparent about it and they brought people along and they gave them something that meant something to them, right? Like that's the way to do it.
We really have to educate the public on this because they literally don't understand these new nuclear power plants that Gates are working on, or exactly how safe they are, or GMOs. Like you literally are working against your own best interests and the best interests of the planet.
Yeah, I would say that the root of it is to figure out how to get them, is to how to build trust, right? And interestingly, it's not always education, right? Because like if I'm like, hey, I'm going to educate you, I'm sort of saying like,
you're dumb.
You don't know. I'm smarter than you. You're a dummy, right? And what really they're like is, no, bro, I don't trust you. Right? Like, and so like that was a big learning for me that I was taught by the team here at Ginkgo, honestly. Like, and our folks on our
building trust is about what then? Transparency.
Transparency is a big one, yeah. And then and owning up to like that. Hey, yeah, nukes have bad uses too, and like how are we going to ameliorate that? And like just meeting people where they are.
Yeah. I mean, it's just people. I couldn't believe after Fukushima, like Germany's like, yeah, we're going to turn off our nuclear power.
I know, it's sad. I know.
It's they built it below sea level against all, advice they were given, and it's like the oldest. You're talking about a design from the '60s. Like things evolve. Like the airplanes we flew in the '60s are different than the ones today.
Yeah, I hear you.
All right, listen. Continued success. Thanks for doing this work for society and humanity. And I'd love to check in with you in a year or two and see how far you get with all of this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you're out in Boston, come give you a tour.
Absolutely,
all right,
yes. I love Boston. Haven't been there since the pandemic, but I was there right before it, and God, had some great food too.
Yeah.
All right, we'll see you next time on This Week in Startups. Bye-bye.